Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to part 4 of British Policy 1914-1941 and Winston Churchill, featuring Horus and Ataman. Okay, how are you going, boys?
I lost you there for a second, Duke. I don't know about you, Atman.
No, I was all right on my end.
There's a bit of a delay.
Yeah, there probably was, because I was waiting to turn off the sound on the actual YouTube stream, which I have to keep an eye on in case we get sex bots and such things. So anyway, believe it or not, that happens all the time.
It's all the BDSM talk you're constantly doing, but yeah, carry on.
Iron Duke.
I don't think it's got anything to do with that whatsoever, Adam, but there we go. Jobu says Churchill was never late like this, which is not true. Churchill was often late, but there we go. Yeah, well, that's true too. But I'm always accused of being that, so never worry.
Are you late though? Oh, you are actually.
Well, no, I wasn't. Really, this is 6:03 a.m. and we've been going for over a minute, so
we're not pretty impressive doing a stream first thing in the morning. I couldn't do that.
Well, it's only 6:04 a.m. So,
and I also couldn't get pissed first thing in the morning, so you know.
Well, absolutely, and I've got another stream to do almost as soon as this one finishes, which is partly why this one is half an hour earlier. I'm on Red Hawk's stream for Man's Hour when he's going to be talking about the military, of which I once was a member for my sins. So there we go.
You were in the military?
I was.
I'm joking, sorry. Cool. Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing, Atman?
Yeah, I'm very good.
All right, guys. Well, basically, last week, as I recall, we got up to Poland, pretty much. The German invasion of Poland. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we discussed the sort of the wranglings around, why. I mean, I'm still not that clear why Germany invaded. There's the book Hitler's Revolution by Richard Tedor gives quite a lot of detail about it. But I was still in the middle of reading that when we began the stream. So yeah, I know that obviously there was quite a lot of Polish plans to invade Germany through the 1930s. They were pretty. I don't know. They were pretty hot against the Germans, and
all very foolish, you might add. But yeah,
They seem to get massively invigorated after they're sort of being cut loose after World War One. They were being quite aggressive against Russia as well. They were kind of wanted to flex their muscles and push out on both sides.
Yeah, well, the thing was, the Poles beat the Russians in 1919 and 1920 when they were trying to invade Poland. But the Russians were Bolshevik.
Yeah, and at that point, their armies were operating on largely released prisoners and stuff like that. It wasn't the most powerful of armies in Russian history.
No, and it was also under the command of Trotsky, of course.
Yeah,
Stalin was one of them as well. Stalin was one of the generals of the invasion of Poland as well.
And Stalin was not a great general, but nor was Trotsky. But that didn't stop people like Hitchens supporting him, Christopher Hitchens, who went directly from Trotskyist to neocon, which is a surprisingly common trajectory if you look at it.
Yeah.
But there we go.
The worse Hitchens, the less good one.
Yeah, not Peter Hitchens. I'm talking about Christopher Hitchens, which I still see people today saying, "Oh, he was a great bloke." Yeah, sure, he was a great bloke, except he went from Trotskyist directly to neocon.
Do you know what I find really horrible? I never knew this until after he was dead, I think. But there's videos of him on American TV, like call-in shows and stuff, and he supported all those Marxist revolutionaries all over Southern Africa, like Mozambique, Angola,
Yep.
All these places, Zimbabwe, obviously. And has that been good for Africa? Has that been good for whites or blacks in Africa? Like, that's just been
wasn't real good when I lived there, mate. But
no.
I'm sure I saw him crying on some interview somewhere over the death of Rosa Luxemburg once as well.
Revolting.
Yeah. Richard Ford is in the chat. Richard, don't Fed post, please. If I might ask you not to. But yeah, all right, guys. I reckon we basically got up to Poland last week.
Yeah, the Poles were doing a lot of Fed posting at the time. They were.
Well, it's a bit like today, really, isn't it? There's a lot of Fed posting.
I mean, there was tons of like the ethnic strife that mid-century Germany was known for was probably actually even stronger in Poland, sort of, you know, in the through the 20s and early 30s, and that never gets mentioned ever.
Adam and the Poles weren't anti-English. Of course they were. Yeah, right. Anyway, leaving that aside. Susan, only in Minecraft. Honestly. But yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's leave that aside. And look, to bring this back to what this series of streams is about, my point is, why did Britain give the big red war button to Poland? Which is always a mistake. You keep your big red war button for your own people. You don't give it to somebody else. But Chamberlain, because he got pissed off about Munich and all this shit, gave it to the Poles and got the French to do the same thing, because France wouldn't have done it unless Britain did.
Hang on, though, isn't that kind of the other way around? Wasn't it France that tried to rope us into signing it? They'd already signed it.
No, it was the other way around, and it was the Brits who got the French to sign on to that one. Earlier on, the French had this, what was it called? Something like the mini Entente or something.
Yeah, it was like trying to replace the old Russian ally with a bunch of little Slavic states. Yeah.
The old Russian and British allies, yeah. But that was the French. But by then, by the late 1930s, the French had given up on that shit. And actually, the French followed the Brits in like giving a war guarantee to Poland. And of course, Poland, as we pointed out on the last stream, was a military dictatorship in 1939. It wasn't a democracy; it was a military dictatorship.
Yeah,
like one of the names that sticks out. I mean, like there's the famous General Pilsudski, who I believe had died by the mid 30s, isn't he? But he like kind of set the tone in some ways. He was obviously obviously a general before he was a politician, I think. And then as a politician, he was still very militaristic. I think he sounded like someone who more or less enjoyed war, like a bit like Churchill. Like constantly sort of bombastic in his well, not just in his rhetoric, but in his policies as well, I think. And then like when he died, I think there's most of the other, I mean, it was as you said, a military dictatorship, and all the other leading politicians at the time, there was a lot of them are hard to pronounce, but I mean the easiest one to pronounce and probably the biggest figure was Joseph Beck, and he's the one who was the foreign minister during all this, and his judgment seems to have been awful. He seems to I think you mentioned earlier, I mean they tried to sort of front up to the Soviets and Germany. And it's like, really, you're not going to be able to take on both, especially if they sign a pact against you. Which
and of course, initially, even Adolf Babe's idea was to get an alliance with Poland to attack the Soviets, because that was his main deal.
I must say, if only, I think history would have been better if that had happened. If there was going to be a war,
I totally agree.
How much better would that have been in so many ways? I mean, for the Poles, like as much as anyone else, you know.
Yeah. For everyone in Poland, it would have been a much, much better deal. But the Polish military dictatorship didn't want that, and then eventually the Brits and the French gave them this war guarantee, which was, of course, meaningless because there was no help that Britain and France could give to Poland.
Yeah,
no practical help whatsoever.
The really mad thing about that is that the Poles seem to have taken it as a much sort of harder, firmer thing than it was. Right? They seem to have thought that was actually going to save them in a war with Germany, and therefore they didn't need.
Well, I can only guess they thought it would put Germany off from declaring war.
Right.
That's the only thing I can think. Which I guess it was supposed to do, but of course it never did.
It really seems to have made Germany just feel more trapped, like more surrounded. I think like Poland went from being someone they might at some point be able to make an agreement with to someone they definitely couldn't make an agreement with. And so they had France on one side, they had, like Poland on the other, Soviets beyond them, and it just made their situation more frustrated. So I think it's
and then you had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which basically made Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia allies, in effect, and they split Poland between them.
There was in the treaty that Britain made with Poland and with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, there was secret protocols in both, weren't there? And the secret protocol in the British-Polish Pact was that it only applied to aggression from Germany. So had the Soviets, I don't think the Soviets would have been wise to do this, but had the Soviets invaded Poland, before or other than the Soviet-German pact being made, if they'd invaded Poland, then Britain would not have done anything. I mean, they might have condemned it.
Well, look, let's give Chamberlain his due, and Chamberlain wasn't in favour of the communists, so okay.
Yeah, that's one of the shining things about Chamberlain, that he gets no praise for. That he
detested the communists and was never going to help them.
And bizarrely, Churchill, although he used to hate the communists, had stopped doing so by the.
Some of us might argue that Churchill didn't have any real beliefs, but that would just be me, I guess.
No integrity. No integrity. And then he obviously resumed it, and he was then the man who sort of kicked off the Cold War in some ways.
He absolutely did. Yeah, I mean, like Britain went to war over Poland. The Soviet Union took Poland over, and to be fair to Churchill, he actually did protest in 1945, but by that stage, his war efforts had made Britain so weak that we had absolutely no effect on the Americans and the Russians. That his protests did no good whatsoever. But he did protest, to give him his due, because someone on some of the discords I'm on will point out, oh yeah, Churchill did protest. Yeah, he did, but by that time Britain was so weak, we couldn't do anything about it.
Well, it seems to me like that he did become, by the end of the war, somewhat more realistic. But Roosevelt was prepared to just sign away Eastern Europe, which,
in some way, Roosevelt wanted the Russians on his side.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Like he wanted an ally against Japan, essentially, to stop their encroachments in the Pacific.
I think Buchanan or someone was arguing that all that sort of friendship towards the Soviets in regard to Japan gained was that the Soviets began to fight Japan something like a matter of days before the two nukes were dropped.
Pretty much, yeah. That's 100% correct, Horus. Yes, that's why I'm.
Yeah, but I think he thought he could drag them into a proper alliance against Japan.
But
properly, and it never really materialized.
Well, yeah, but also, and bear in mind, by the time all this was happening in 1944, like America and Britain were actually winning against the Japanese anyway. There was no way Japan could win by this stage.
Obviously, there's the factor that Roosevelt died in a few months before. I don't know what was it, early 1945. He died, and then obviously Truman.
It wasn't all that long before Hitler killed himself.
Okay, so we're talking like maybe March, April.
Yeah, they all, because all the dickweeds in the Führer bunker were celebrating, saying, "Oh, we're saved," which of course.
They really never understood, did they?
No, they didn't.
It's like you're not just up against Roosevelt.
No,
ridiculous.
Yeah, like if anything, the funny thing is Roosevelt kind of was quite a sort of great leader in a way. purely, but in a sort of technical term, because he did wield power quite effectively. But even then, he was still fairly powerless within that regime than you could say, let's say Hitler was in the German one, or Stalin was in the Russian one.
Right. The president, is nowhere near, is no Führer.
Yeah, well, but FDR was pretty close. FDR was pretty fascist.
He was probably as close as you would ever get to a proper dictator in America. But even then, it's not.
So some people, there's I think the Mises Institute in America. One of them wrote a book called American Caesars, like people American presidents who've approached sort of dictatorhood. Like Lincoln.
FDR must be number one.
FDR, I think is the biggest one, and then Woodrow Wilson again because of the war crimes, and then
another and he was a bastard as well. Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, although surprisingly, he seems to have uttered at least some regret at the end of his presidency. Like, was kind of horrified at some of the things that had happened under his own administration. It's quite interesting. Like he said something about like shadow. I don't know, something about a shadow government taking over and stuff. It's like,
all right, we're getting a long way away from that subject here.
Just
but I would just say that American friends of mine, the three presidents they really hate tend to be FDR, Woodrow Wilson, and Abraham Lincoln. But that's just what Americans who I like tell me. So
like people who sort of preferred America's sort of older nature, right? It's more constitutional.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remark about Poland. I mean, you said that obviously Chamberlain, by making his pact with Poland, gave them the war button. It's not just a bad idea; it's also almost unique in history, isn't it? I mean, who's ever done that before?
It's insanity. It's totally insanity.
The other thing I find interesting about it is that I really do think Chamberlain was all but 99% was forced into doing that. And what's his name? Buchanan spends pages and pages and pages talking about that decision, and he says that one element in it was just that Halifax, who had been what they call an appeaser, i.e. a peacemaker, really had been that up until that point, but in early 1939 he became persuaded by the case for war. Apparently, on the basis of he became persuaded that it was good, that we needed to destroy Germany for the sake of the empire, which was what Churchill at some times put forward as a pretext. But I don't believe Churchill ever really believed that. I believe that was just a sort of a public argument he gave. But Halifax,
hang on, we've got to talk about this at some point during this stream, because
definitely wrong.
I've been talking about this on my Discord for hours now. But I would say this: I don't think Hitler gave a shit about the British Empire. And by the way, I don't think Hitler was a good bloke at all. I think he was an asshole. But whilst I don't think Britain should have given Poland the war button, I'm not saying Britain should never have ever gone to war against Germany in 1939. All I'm saying is, why say, okay, if Hitler invades Poland, Britain's going to go to war with you? That's insane.
Yeah.
Why was Germany invading Poland threatening Britain? It wasn't, not in the slightest degree. It would be like a dimwit like Liz Truss turning around and saying, well, Russia invading Ukraine is somehow threatening Britain. No, it's not.
This is why I got so into this sort of the causes of the war thing and made this series of videos a few years ago, because it is absolutely alive today. The myths of there's the way that the word Hitler is used. It's not just to refer to the actual man; it's used to refer to a sort of a cartoonish notion of a leader of a foreign country whom you cannot suffer to exist. You have to destroy them. It's been done with Saddam Hussein, who was a monster.
Hitler in 1939 was not a threat to Britain.
Right. I mean, this is. I mean, apart from just curiosity, I think this is a good reason why we study these things. Is because these myths are still used for bellicosity, belligerence, and so on today. wrongly. And like Liz Truss and Boris Johnson are completely, whether they seriously believe it in their heart of hearts or not, I don't know, but they follow these myths utterly.
Do they have
to our
hearts?
detriment?
Do they even have hearts? I'm not even sure, but yeah. But I don't know.
One's got no heart, one's got no brain, one's got no balls. You know, and it's just one of them's Dorothy.
That is so true. But yeah, I mean, honestly, Ataman, was Hitler a threat to Britain in 1939? Do you reckon?
So this is where I've kind of got a little bit of a pushback. Probably no, but I kind of think that once he's taken France and Norway, if I was in leadership, I would also start to worry quite a lot.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But I'm saying in 1939, before he invaded Poland, right? And bear in mind, the war against France and the BEF in France only happened because we declared war over Poland. Okay. So if Britain and France don't declare war over Poland, Hitler invades Poland and takes it over, probably with Stalin. How does that threaten Britain?
Well, the thing is, like, it's not so much a threat, but in a way, you know, our inability to be able to sort of keep various small nations, whether they're legitimate or not, like Czechoslovakia and places like that, secure within Central Europe, very much undermines our authority abroad.
How?
Because we're unable to keep the peace within a continent.
We're all right within Central Europe. I see what you're saying, but bear in mind, if Britain and France don't declare war on Poland, on Germany, because Adolf Babes invades Poland in 1939, if we don't do that, Germany's not at war with even France, let alone Britain, and the Royal Navy is still the largest navy in the world. And there is no way that there is. Hang on, but there is no way the dwarfish German navy of 1939 can do anything to invade Britain. It's just not possible.
Sure, but the problem is that kind of ignores the way that nations escalate before conflict. I mean, you can't, as Britain, be certain that France is going to do nothing if you can in 1939 because France didn't want to do anything. Trust me. Well, yeah, but we've literally covered in this streams nations in Europe that did stupid things for sort of practically no reason at all. I mean, and of course, the French government of the 1930s was very prone to those sorts of decisions. So,
well, the French governments, because they changed every 3 weeks, but yeah.
and the other thing as well that you've got is that you've got the problem of like the Soviet Union. What happens when Germany and the Soviet Union come to blows, which they definitely look like they were going to do, even in sort of 37. You know, even when the pact was signed, it was very much seen by everyone as a temporary measure.
Yep. So why wouldn't we just sit back and say, well, let's watch them kill each other? Because that's what I would have done.
Because the thing is, whoever like the spoils from that war is immense, you know. So Germany, when they would beat the Soviet Union, if it wasn't, you know, if it came to blows with no one else intervening, would absolutely end up with more naval bases, far more land, and an absolutely enormous population by comparison to us. And I'm not saying that means they would just turn around and like invade the British Isles. But you know, if they then did also have, you know, like France and Norway, that's giving them sort of looking 5 to 10 years into the future quite a lot of soft power that we can't so effectively counter. That is going to threaten our supremacy. I'm not saying that. I'm not like justifying the war. I'm just throwing out a few counters.
Yeah, no, look, all of that I see totally. But like I said, if I'd have been the British Prime Minister, I would have said, well, if Germany wants to go to war with Russia, I mean, first of all, I would have said, well, if Germany takes over Poland, that's sad, but I don't really care. But like I don't really care who runs Ukraine, you know. But then I would have said, well, if Germany wants to go to war with Russia, great, that's two potential enemies killing each other. That's what I would have said. I would have still quietly in the background have been building up the British Armed Forces for whatever eventuality at a rate we could afford to do, but nothing else. And to me, that would have been the sensible way to do things as a British person.
That was roughly Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain's thinking, and I think it was probably the mainstream view. And it's only the late 30s, especially after Kristallnacht, that the more sort of emotional, fanatical, it's got to be a war against Germany specifically, not the Soviets types like Churchill, like Leo Amery and stuff. They took over in the last couple of years, and it's been their supporters, the people who agree with them, who've written history since and silenced everyone else. I think that's how that became the normal view. But the mainstream view until about 37, 38, I think, would have been, of course, let's try and avoid war in general. And obviously we want to be friends with everyone who's not communist. And Chamberlain tried to exclude the Soviets from everything he did. He tried to appease all of Europe except the Soviets. I think that was the right thing. They should have always been treated like a renegade force and a threat to everyone, a common threat to all of Europe, and a reason for us all to operate in common.
Yep, don't disagree with that.
Especially when I don't know how aware people were of their military build-up, but it's detailed in the books by Viktor Suvorov and by Joachim Hoffmann that their military, by the time Germany invaded, albeit Germany's invasion destroyed a hell of a lot of it, but they had gargantuan forces, albeit with low morale because a lot of them were slaves, conscripts. I mean, but
yeah, no, I don't disagree with much of what you said there, Horace. John Best brings up a good point in the chat. When should Britain have gone to war in 1942? Well, certainly, John Best, 1942 was when the Royal Navy was aiming to go to war prior to 1939. And would Japan have attacked us in the Far East if we weren't at war with Germany? No, I don't think she would have, because the Japanese Navy was nowhere near big enough to fight the Royal Navy if the Royal Navy was not also fighting Germany and Italy first. I think you're dead right there, John Best. And again, look, all of this series of streams that we've done, and this is number 4, from my point of view, have been looking at this from the point of view of a British patriotic angle. I'm not looking at it from Hitler's point of view or Stalin's point of view or FDR's point of view. I'm looking at this from the point of view of a patriotic British person. And like, war button to Poland was insane. But let's move on a bit. So anyway, Hitler and Stalin, who by this stage are basically allies in all but name because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they divide Poland up between them. And also Eastern Europe, they divide up between them largely. And then you have the Norway campaign. Now, the Norwegian campaign was largely because Germany wanted to secure our iron ore supplies from Sweden across the Baltic Sea. And Winston Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty at this stage under Chamberlain, had pretty much decided he was going to invade Norway one way or the other anyway. So, like, the German invasion beat the British invasion by a couple of weeks is the real truth. But, of course, the British invasion was not well organised. The Royal Navy did really well, and during the Norwegian campaign sank about 30% of the German Navy. And the German Navy was far smaller than the Royal Navy anyway. But like HMS Warspite, the battleship, like steamed up a fjord and just sank German destroyers left, right, and center because the German destroyers couldn't do anything back, which was kind of cool. But so the Royal Navy did really well in the Norwegian campaign, but the British and French army didn't, and they lost it. The Germans lost at least a third of their fleet in that action in invading Norway. which meant that there was no chance of this so-called Operation Sea Lion that Churchill went on and on about in 1940 ever really happening. The Germans had no chance whatsoever of invading Britain in 1940, whether they defeated the Royal Air Force Fire Command or not. They had no chance of crossing the Channel. The Royal Navy would have destroyed them.
This campaign is not something I've studied a lot, but is it true that that Britain and or Germany, I'm not sure, but violated Norwegian sovereignty in a lot of ways?
Yeah, but both nations did to some degree.
Obviously, Germany by invading was quite an infraction.
Yeah, but the Brits were going to invade the place anyway if the Germans hadn't.
So that's true, is it? So and also they mined Norwegian waters before the Germans invaded. Is that right?
Yeah, we started to, but didn't get very far. This was like Churchill in charge of the Admiral.
Right. Definitely.
And also another famous action was the Altmark, which was a German Navy supply ship, an armed German Navy supply ship. Had all the British Merchant Navy prisoners on board that the Graf Spee had captured before the Graf Spee was cornered and beaten by the Royal Navy cruisers in South America. She had all these prisoners on board, and HMS Cossack, which was a Royal Navy destroyer, actually boarded her. Some of the blokes with cutlasses and blokes with bayonets and all this stuff. And there were all these British prisoners in the hold, Merchant Navy dudes. And they were wondering what the hell was going on. And they heard the famous cry, "The Navy's here." And the Royal Navy rescued them all, of course, because the Royal Navy was easily the best British service in World War II.
Including in a boarding action.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A boarding action. Revolvers, bayonets, rifles,
corridors, ricochets,
all of that shit, man. The Royal Navy was easily the best British service in World War II. Like, it won most of the battles it was set to fight, except for idiot ones that Churchill got in the fight, which we will come on to later in the stream.
I mean, like Churchill's role in the Norway campaign. I mean, he was the chief beneficiary of what is often called a debacle. Or a failure, you know.
Oh yeah. It was his plan,
as if by design.
And yet Chamberlain got the sack, not him.
Right. And do you perhaps wonder if there was, you know, right, some forethought about that? You know, I mean, not that he could know that would bring Chamberlain down, but he could know that it could be used to damage him with the right friends in the media and the right outspoken friends in Parliament and so on. You know. It kind of like it was almost like a no risk move for Churchill to escalate and inflame the situation.
I have to be very careful because I don't think Churchill was an evil man. I think he was a misguided man more than he was an evil man. But I could easily be
useless and fat and a drunk.
Yeah. In fact, yeah.
A good deal of truth out of him, but I don't think he was an evil man particularly.
Rascal?
No, he wasn't even that, because
tosser.
That implies him being better than he was. I tell you what, the Churchill story that I think most sums him up is that he was attached to the 21st Lancers in the Sudan. And he took part in one of the last great British cavalry charges at Omdurman in 1898 against the Dervishes with the 21st Lancers as a second lieutenant. Apparently, he'd hurt his arm, so he couldn't use his sword, so he used a Mauser pistol instead. This was what he claimed, anyway.
German pistol?
Yeah, German pistol. Yeah, it was the most modern and expensive pistol in the world in 1898. He had like a 20-round magazine, you know. And he killed a lot of dervishes with it, apparently. But he couldn't use his sword because he hurt his arm, the poor dear. But anyway, the 21st Lancers, they charged a group of dervishes who they thought were, I don't know, 800-900 blokes, and the regiment was maybe 500 men. And they charged these guys, but what they didn't realize was that behind them there was a dried up riverbed. And in this dried up riverbed were another 4,500 dervishes. And so the British cavalry charged through these 900 blokes and then had to go down into the dried up riverbed because, horses don't stop. And then they were fighting hand to hand with these blokes and surrounded on all sides. And about a quarter of the 21st Lancers were killed or wounded. And they killed a hell of a lot more dervishes, of course. And there were blokes at the end of it who had skin hanging off their faces and their arms from the dervish swords and spears. And there was a troop sergeant major who half his face was hanging over his mouth from a dervish sword cut. And he was trying to tell these guys to form up. And fortunately, the British officers said, okay, we're going to dismount and use our carbines and shoot these fucks. But there were blokes saying, yeah, okay, we'll go back, guys. We'll go back. And Churchill took part in that. But on his way down to that charge, because he was not actually a 21st Lancer, he was an 8th Hussar, I think, if I remember correctly. And he'd been transferred into that regiment because of his American millionaire's daughter, mother influence, who was a bit of a upper-class whore who, fucked anyone who had a lot of influence, basically. And Jenny Churchill, what her name was. And she got him transferred to 21st Lancers. But the story in the 21st Lancers is that on his way down the early bit of the Nile on the Egyptian railway towards the Sudan, Churchill spent most of that under the seat because his fellow officers stuck him under the seat because he was such a bastard. And I actually think that might well be true.
I could believe that. His exploits in that battle he described, is there any other accounts, or is it all just...
No. He absolutely did do what he said. Churchill wasn't a coward, all right? There is no way that Churchill was a coward.
No.
He fought on the Northwest Frontier, and he was criticised on the Northwest Frontier because he got himself a grey horse.
Sorry, is that in Canada or something?
Northwest Frontier of India.
Oh, right, sorry.
In 1897. And he got himself a grey horse, which, of course, most people would call a white horse. And all the officers said, you don't ride that because you'll get picked out. But, of course, Churchill got that horse on purpose because he wanted to be noticed.
Right. Okay. Right. That's, I mean, I suppose like a level of daring is consistent with what...
he wasn't a coward. Anyone who tells you Winston Churchill was a coward is a liar. He wasn't. He was a brave soldier. He fought in the Anglo-Boer War in the armoured train incident where he was captured very bravely, even though he was supposedly just a war correspondent.
Well, I was sort of referring to that because apparently his account of that is the only one there is. And so some people have doubted. The thing is, I don't necessarily doubt that he was brave, because I think that what you've said is consistent with what Ed Dutton describes in his book Churchill's Headmaster about Churchill as a child. He was all sorts of bad, but not a coward. No, reckless, if anything, recklessly brave in some ways.
Yeah, Churchill wasn't a coward. I've seen people say Churchill was a coward. No, he wasn't.
But I do think he was a liar in some ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when he was captured at the armoured train incident in South Africa, and I've been to the place where he was captured, and I've also been to the school he escaped from in Pretoria. But when he was captured, he claimed he was captured by Louis Botha, which he certainly wasn't. It was like some unknown Boer commander who captured him. It wasn't Louis Botha.
Was it right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, he liked to make a celebrity of himself alongside his other traits. He wanted to be a big man in lots of ways.
Absolutely, but we've gone a long way off the subject again. So,
well, we were on Norway, weren't we? And I think he was the beneficiary of the Norway campaign, despite probably being primarily to blame for its failure or
that's close to the truth.
Or wrongly deciding to engage in it at all. I don't really know, to be honest. But he certainly gained from that. Obviously, it was immediately after that and during the invasion of France that Chamberlain resigned, right? During the early sort of week or two of...
Well, Chamberlain resigned over Norway, which was mostly Churchill's doing. But
yeah, and it was Leo Amery who called out in Parliament, "For God's sake, man, go," who was close friend and ally of Churchill.
Yeah.
And then obviously there was apparently there's a moment where the king invited Halifax and Churchill to a private, discussion, and it was up to the king apparently to choose. The king said that, are you both putting yourselves forward? Apparently Halifax was a very sort of reserved character and wasn't the type to just go, well, it's me, let it be me. And
I heard Halifax refused, but
he actually turned it down, did he?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Well, I've heard that he said it would be difficult, what with him being a lord and obviously sitting in the House of Lords. Yeah, it would be difficult for him to be prime minister.
Yeah, not impossible,
but he might. But people do that though, don't they? If someone offers you a slice of cake, maybe the first time you say no. It's no, thanks. But I don't know. That's a bit of an archaic example. Maybe our grandparents' generation. But sometimes people say no when they want to say yes. I reckon Halifax was doing that. He wasn't actually saying no.
Well, but prior to Halifax, Lord Salisbury was the last lord who was Prime Minister of Britain, and he was also the last real Conservative Prime Minister of Britain, if you ask me. But that's what I heard, is that Halifax refused.
And Churchill was really up for it by this point.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Churchill loved nothing better than being politically in charge during a war. He loved it. Adored it.
Yeah, and Buchanan gives quotes from him in the First World War as well, where he's saying, literally thrilled by the drama and the grand drama of things, and including he says himself, and I'm aware of how much suffering and how much killing there is involved in all this. Is it wrong? He says to people, "Is it wrong that I love this?" So he had a lust for this kind of politics, I guess, Clausewitzian politics. So I think the world took a dark turn the day that he became prime minister. I know I'm somewhat to the extreme end of anti-Churchillianism, but to me this was a dark, terrible moment in British history.
Well, look, remember Gallipoli. I've got to go back to the first of these four streams. When did Churchill leave the Conservative Party? He left the Conservative Party over imperial tariff reform in 1908, which was to try and make the British Empire, and particularly the old Commonwealth, i.e. Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and backland South Africa, something real. That was what imperial tariff reform was about. And Churchill was so anti that he left the Conservative Party, crossed the floor, and joined the Liberals. In 1908.
In the book Churchill and the Star by Martin Gilbert, his official biographer, he mentions that there was actually another motivation as well, that Churchill had pissed off his constituents and was thinking of moving seat. I think he had various seats all over the place. He had Dundee at one point, he had Manchester, Oldham, Epping, Thames and all this. And part of he may have actually been given a false reason about the tariff preference, because that implies again that he had principles, right, which is doubtful. But it might actually have been that he was seeking a new seat and knew that he would not be able to win a seat for the Liberals in the constituency he was in, whereas he made a lot of friends in Parliament by pretending a principled stance, and they were then we'll help you get Oldham or wherever it was.
Okay.
We go back to 1908 here. I don't want to, distract you.
Horace, all I'm saying is that he left the Conservative Party that wanted to bring in the imperial tariff preference.
He ratted on his original party.
Yeah,
and then he re-ratted on his new party.
Yeah, that is why in the 1930s, most real Conservatives never trusted him.
Damn right.
Right, and absolutely correct, yes. But that was like imperial tariff preference was an absolutely pro-British Empire and especially British Old Commonwealth policy. And Churchill was totally against it.
So he preferred free trade regardless of the empire.
Yes, he preferred letting American and German and French and everybody else's products come into Britain willy-nilly as against the British Empire and the old Commonwealth of, as I say, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa.
Sort of a globalist in a way.
Yeah, yes. Strange to say, yes. I actually said to someone today on the Discord that maybe that's why a globalist puppet like dimwit Liz Truss and the so-called Conservative Party today can hold Winston Churchill up as some kind of hero.
Right. He did pioneer so many of their current positions. He really did. He was an early Tory in favour of welfare as well.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was never really a Conservative.
No, nothing about him was Conservative.
He was always really a liberal.
He did say, "Let's keep Britain white," though. That one time.
Well,
that one time, the second time, and that Ataman, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was like the second time he became Prime Minister after World War II, was it not?
Yeah.
Early 50s, wasn't it? But apparently that is just one diary entry from, it's either Anthony Eden or Harold Macmillan, I think, and they wrote in their diary after a cabinet meeting one day that they paraphrased his position on what slogans they should adopt for the next election. That was all it was. They just the line in the diary is, Winston seems to think that "Keep Britain White" would be a good slogan, and that's it. That's where all of that comes from, and he gets credit for that, which I think is undeserved. I mean, he may have just been electioneering. It would have been a good slogan. It would have been popular.
It would have been excellent. Yeah, I agree with you. Jobu says Churchill birthed Australia's national myth. Is there anything he can't do? I'm guessing by that Jobu is talking about the many thousands of Australians and New Zealanders he killed at Gallipoli. But of course, those numbers are dwarfed by the 3 or 4 times as many Brits who Churchill killed at Gallipoli, who no one ever remembers anymore at all. But, I'm sure you're right there, Jerry.
I didn't know that.
3 or 4 times more Brits died at Gallipoli than Australians and New Zealanders.
And it was a pretty miserable place to be, as I've heard.
Yeah, it really was. But you don't get me wrong. Look, I live in Australia, and the Anzac thing is a big deal, and it should be a big deal. And they were very brave. But 3 or 4 times more British soldiers were killed in Gallipoli than Australians and New Zealanders.
I went to a moving thing in Thailand now, Siam back then. There was one of the sections of the, what was it called, the Burmese Railway that the Japanese were building.
Oh yeah, the Railway of Death. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather was forced to work on that in another place, not the worst parts. But I went to the place they called, was it Death Valley or something? It's a place where they had to blast through rock, and apparently people were literally being worked to death, just dropping dead, or being flogged to death and stuff. And I think there was a lot of Anzac troops there. There was a really moving little museum and memorial built there. The Thai government, obviously, it wasn't the same significance to them, but this whole museum and site, tourist site, had been built by I think some Anzac commission sort of thing. It's worth, if anyone's in that part of the world, it's worth visiting near Kanchanaburi, near the River Kwai. Mm-hmm. A drive away from there. Yeah, made me realise what a sort of Commonwealth, Empire brotherhood there was, at the time in some ways. Because my grandfather was over there, a slave basically, with guys from New Zealand and Australia.
Yep. I do. There's a great book called The Naked Island by Russell Braddon, who's an Australian dude who joined the Australian Imperial Force in 1940, I think, and thought he was going to go and end up fighting the Germans, but ended up fighting the Japanese in Malaya and got captured by them, and then tells his story in the Japanese prisoner of war camp. And The Naked Island by Russell Braddon is a book I think all all Brits and Australians and what have you should read. It's a great book, really good. It's very difficult reading in places, but very, very tough reading in places.
Really barbaric things.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. You would not believe.
So we're up to the invasion of France, right? And I presume all three of us, I'm guessing we've not got much to say about that because it was all over in 6 weeks, wasn't it? And I shouldn't laugh.
Well, I mean, nothing happened for like months after Norway. So you had what was called the phony war, when nothing much was happening. And the Brits and French wanted to go into Belgium, and the Belgians said, no, we're neutral. So we're not going to let you come in here before there's a war. Of course, immediately the Germans invaded them. They allowed them in, but it was far too late by that stage. And, the BEF and some of the French went into Belgium. Much good it did anyone. But there was this phony war period when nothing was really happening. And then the Germans eventually said, okay, well, because Britain and France had declared war on us, and because Hitler, of course, wanted to attack Russia, he couldn't do that with the British and French sitting behind him. Even though neither the British nor the French had the least idea of actually attacking the Germans. That was never going to happen, That was just like fiction.
I think this feeds into my theory of Churchill having more or less chosen, with the Norway campaign, what I suggested that whether it was a success or failure, it was going to work out for him either way. It's sort of a no risk move for him, because that was the Norway campaign was what was it, April to June, I think. So it slightly overlapped with the invasion of France. Obviously, it was kind of a way of provoking the end of the phony war. I think the phony war, what do we call it? Is that right? Is that right? Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Hitchens' book was called The Phony Victory, wasn't it? Yeah. The Phony War, yeah. So it's a way of, because I think people like Churchill would have found the phony war very frustrating because it was like second worst thing to peace with Germany, really, because it was like war with Germany, but we're not actually fighting them. And obviously they're arming up and stuff, which is what Churchill was always going on about through the 30s. But yeah, so I think it was. I can't remember. I don't know who initiated the Norway moves, but it certainly, as you said, it worked out well for Churchill. And then obviously the invasion of France. I mean, the Dunkirk thing was spun to massive propaganda effects by the left in Britain as well as pro-war Tories, because Michael Foot. It
actually wasn't. Horace, I have to disagree.
Well, the
with
book
you
Guilty.
No. Hang on. Let me explain why. Because the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was still in place, the left in Britain, the Labour Party, the Socialists, who were heavily infected with Soviets, they actually didn't support it at all. You have to understand something about Britain in World War II, is that the Labour Party was heavily infiltrated by the Soviets.
And then the Communist Party had some prominence at the time as well. The Communist Party supported it, and that was an embarrassment to the rest of the left, wasn't it? And the rest of the left were,
what I'm trying to point out is that the Labour Party in the 1930s and actually into the 1960s was heavily infiltrated by the Soviet
is the wrong word.
Go on and.
They were complicit. I mean, in Orlando Feige's book, The People's Tragedy, that he covers how there were Labour MPs even right the way back in 1919, getting factory tours in the Soviet Union.
Harold Wilson was very, very pro Soviet Union.
But there was people, those MI5, some of them were convinced that he was a Soviet agent, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was, probably.
I think it was.
I still think that's the reason he resigned as suddenly as he did. But
this is sort of a bit off topic, but I was watching a thing today where, I won't go into that. It's a long digression. But I reckon that Wilson wasn't a Soviet agent, but I reckon the whole of the left should always, most of the left anyway, should always be suspected of working with our enemies, especially obviously communists.
Sure. In the old days, when there was a Soviet Union, of course, and these days our enemies are corporate globalists like dimwits like Liz Truss. But
But yeah. I mean, like, just to add to what Atman said about, I haven't read that Figs. Is it Figs or Figs? I haven't read any of his. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if tell me whether you recommend his books, but there's one that confirms similar things, and it's Giles Udy, Udy. He did a book called Labour and the Gulag. Only came out about 4 or 5 years ago. It's really good.
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's full of information, like full of details that I never heard before, and it shows that as soon as the Soviet coup happened, the Bolshevik coup happened, Labour just started backing it straight away. I mean, loads of them, not unanimously, but like Ramsay MacDonald, who was their leader for more than 10 years, he backed it.
Yep.
He was happy.
Yeah, no, Ramsay MacDonald was a scumbag, but I don't think there's ever been a good Labour leader. They're all traitors to one degree or another.
What about Hugh Gateskill?
Yeah, all of them. I don't like Gateskill, and Gateskill is the one people tell me is the moderate.
No, because I've been reading for this series I'm going to do about the European Union, and Hugh Gateskill did this speech in '62, I think, where he, because Macmillan had decided to apply to join the EC, Gateskill sort of partly as a manoeuvre spoke against it, but he also, there's this famous thing of him saying 1,000 years of British history, should we not at least talk about this, like we're going to give up our country? But at the end of the speech he said, I'm not saying we shouldn't join though. For fuck's sake. Like, so these myths, sometimes these false myths build up about him being a patriot and all this. No. Yeah. Still just a fucking
socialist and patriot do not ever go together. Hang on, we've got a long way from where we were talking about, and I would just take us back to the fact that the Labour movement in Britain in 1940, even after the invasion of France, was very lukewarm about the war because the Molotov Ribbentrop Pact was in place, and they were very, very lukewarm about the war because of that.
I think none of the British left, as far as I know, ever really spoke out against Stalin until after the war.
Almost none of them did, mate. And like I said, until Barbarossa in 1941, in July 1941. Until Barbarossa in July 1941, the Labour Party in the UK were very lukewarm about the war because Germany and Stalin were allies.
And I read in, who's the guy? Bowden did a speech about him. He's a historian, Maurice Cowling. He did a book, called, was it The Impact of Hitler? And I read that. And he said that part of the reason why Lord Rothermere of the Daily Mail began to support Oswald Mosley. I mean, Rothermere was quite friendly with Hitler reasonably, and Beaverbrook was for a while, I think, as well, but Rothermere especially. But the reason he supported Oswald Mosley is because he became alarmed about the tendencies in Labour from about 33, 34 onwards, especially led by Sir Stafford Cripps, to form the Popular Front idea, which was obviously led by the Soviet Union. It was, to form a red front across Europe, all against Germany. And Stafford Cripps, was leading the party to a full-on state socialist party. I mean, literally everything nationalised and, no freedom left and whatever. And Stafford Cripps in the war became, I don't know if he became ambassador to the Soviet Union or something, but apparently, so Stafford Cripps, when he obviously involved him going over there and talking to Stalin. That actually made him shrink away from communism somewhat and from, became a less hardcore socialist because he met real communists and realised how brutal they were.
Maybe he met some of their widows.
Right. Or he was doing business with people who, next time he went over there, they disappeared. Or things like this, just off to the gulag. So the war actually taught the left some lessons in some ways. A lot of them.
Oh, look, this is another thing we have to bring out on the stream, is that during World War II, when Churchill took over after Chamberlain, he formed what he called a national, in inverted commas, government. But that government was overwhelmingly socialist in terms of the people who ran it, partly because the Conservatives didn't trust Churchill, quite rightly.
I think they created the position of Deputy Prime Minister for Clement Attlee.
Yeah.
Obviously
but almost all of the people who ran the Churchill's so-called national government were really socialists. They were Labour supporters. Almost all of them. It was a very small minority that were actually conservative.
Yeah, disastrous. And then obviously immediately as soon as the war ended, I mean, before the war in Japan had ended, we had a Labour government with the biggest majority ever at the time.
Well, yeah, and why did that happen? Because the people who were educating, again in inverted commas, educating, in fact brainwashing the British Army and to a lesser degree the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy during World War II were almost all socialists who were all going on about the National Health Service and all these like basically commie talking points. And that's why Churchill was voted out of power in 1945 by his own fighting men.
This, I think, is one of the most atrocious things about the Tories is that they don't do anything, and that's maybe putting it mildly, they don't do anything to stop the left taking over these crucial institutions. Like obviously, as we can see, that's preceded another 80 years worth since the war. Education is completely, including like the Department of Education, the Institute of Education, local education authorities and stuff. This is just one example. It's all controlled by leftists, like totally. Teacher training colleges completely controlled by leftists, and that's by the 50s or 60s they had total control over it.
Yeah, and Horus, the point I'm trying to make is that the British armed forces education officers during the war were the prototypes of those people.
Right.
They were all socialists.
And this happened in America as well. So all these things like the British Council would all be controlled by people who are not pro-British at all. And the same, I don't know what the equivalent is in America, but like you got PBS, like the public broadcasting system in America. I think that's set up since the war, but it's controlled by people who are not interested. They were at war with the public. I mean, this is something I was going to mention a bit later, but like this is later in the war. But when Britain was helping the Yugoslav partisans, communist and monarchist, throw off German control of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, mostly the communists, though, for some unknown reason that I've never worked out. But yeah,
well, there was a communist agent I can't remember what his position was, but he was able to get false reports. Well, false. I mean, just totally biased reports to Hitler. To Churchill. Oh, what was his name? Jack Klugman, I think, like the actor, but
But Horus, let us not forget, like there were at least 3 very big British traders who were like in the pay of the Soviet Union, like Philby and these guys, and that started in World War II under Churchill.
Started in the 30s.
Some of it did, yeah. Some of it did, but there was at least, I think, actually 4.
There was the Cambridge 5, and there was more than that.
Most of them were ex-Cambridge University types.
Yeah.
Total commies.
Yeah,
but let's not allow the Conservatives to just get away with being called lazy. I mean, as Richard pointed out in the chat, if only they had an 80-seat majority. Like you'll often find that the Conservatives will actually fight. They will actually suddenly gain a backbone and a bit of bravery and fight tooth and nail, but only against people to the right of them that are trying to stop the left.
100%, 100%.
They exist to stop the real right. They exist to stop us having a real right-wing party.
Yeah.
They're the utmost.
How much time do the Conservatives spend telling us about the dangers of the right wing?
Yep.
It's just crazy and insane, and nothing to do with actual conservatism at all.
They conserve the gains of the left. Speaking of the
much.
Tories, I think there's one brilliant line in Buchanan's book, and he just says, when Britain offered the guarantee to Poland, he says British Tories became the guarantors of Bolshevism. And I just think that's a very succinct way of putting it. It's like even in 39, the Tories were acting for the extreme left against their own country.
Well, I don't know if they were acting for the extreme left, but they were
the Soviets. The Soviets.
Yeah, I mean, they were acting for the Polish military dictatorship, and after that, the Soviets. Yeah, sure, okay.
As in, they were stopping German expansion eastward.
Yeah, I mean, and why did Britain care about Germany expanding eastward? I've never worked this out.
I really think most of Britain didn't. I really think a small cadre of anti-German extremists took over and have written history since, and that's what happened.
I would have been happy. I would have been happy to see the last German Panzer Grenadier and the last NKVD guy like killing each other somewhere north of Archangel. And as a Brit, I would have just laughed at that and said, "Oh, good."
Further out, I reckon, somewhere out in eastern Siberia.
Yeah, no, but you get my point. You get my point. You get my point.
I do. So we're up to after the invasion after France was defeated. Obviously, is Britain's war the next sort of big thing in Britain's war? Is it in the North African theatre?
No. All right, we've got to go back a little bit because in 1940, the brilliant General Sir Richard O'Connor, who was a great British general in World War II, with about 34,000 men, destroyed an Italian army of over 200,000 men.
Which was mostly African auxiliaries, I will point out, but still.
No, that's exaggerated. No, that's exaggerated, Armand. It was like about maybe 30% African auxiliaries. Most of it was actually Italian, but the Italians were so crap. And look, do you know what? I'm not anti-Italian. Britain shouldn't have gone to war with Italy at all. That was caused mostly by Anthony Eden, in my opinion, as I have said on these streams before. But the brilliant General Sir Richard O'Connor took, 34,000 British and Commonwealth troops and utterly defeated an Italian army of over 200,000 men and captured most of it. And when he was on the point of succeeding and totally kicking Italy out of North Africa, which of course would have meant no Africa Corps and no Middle Eastern war in World War II, because, you capture the ports, the Germans can't land. Royal Navy was the thing, Had he been allowed to do that, there would have been no Middle Eastern war, and there would have been so many extra British troops available to send to Malaya and Singapore and so on. But instead of doing that, what the brilliant Winston Churchill did was he sent 2.5, one Australian, one New Zealand division, and one British armoured brigade to Greece. Now, Winston Churchill's intelligence at that time, British military intelligence, was telling him 20 German divisions were going to invade Greece. Why? How could you, as a sane human being, think that 2.5 Commonwealth divisions, however good and well trained and brave they were, could possibly beat 20 German divisions? I mean, as it happened, only about 15 German divisions invaded the place, but the result was still the same. Because, like I said, it doesn't matter how brave, good, and well-trained your 2.5 British and Commonwealth divisions are, they're not going to bloody well beat 15 German divisions. But Churchill didn't have enough common sense to see that and still sent them there. And by sending them there, stopped Richard O'Connor totally cleaning up North Africa and chucking the Axis out of North Africa. So there was no North African campaign going on for 3 years in North Africa. But, that was Winston Churchill, in my opinion. Like in terms of military stuff, Winston Churchill was a dimwit.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of the opposite of the situation in Germany a lot of the time, because there was a lot of instances where Hitler was talked out of certain decisions, and it kind of ended up being the case that if he'd stuck to his guns, there would have been a better outcome. But in the UK, it was almost kind of the reverse of that. You know, the few times that they managed to talk Churchill out of things was like the few times where they actually managed to save certain catastrophic situations.
Yep. Yeah, Winston Churchill used to keep his field marshals and admirals of the fleet up until 3 and 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning as he got increasingly drunk. And these blokes had a job to do all day. And he did that almost every night of the week. And that's not a lie. That's no sort of Nazi laugh and nonsense. That's what Winston Churchill really did. Go and read Sir Alan Brooke's diaries.
Ivan Maysky in his diaries, the Soviet ambassador, recounts a lot of nights like that. Yeah, like he goes off to Chartwell or he goes off to wherever Churchill's staying. Yeah, 2, 3 in the morning. Sometimes Churchill was like really red, like slurring and stuff. And obviously making decisions of world historic importance as well. It's terrible. Anyway,
but yeah, like I said, I mean, Greece to me is one of the major reasons why Winston Churchill was a really poor war leader, because he stopped Richard O'Connor and his British Western Desert Force, which was a regular British Army, few divisions with some Indians and some Australians, from absolutely cleaning up North Africa, and sent them to Greece where they had no chance of winning. They had no chance whatsoever of winning.
Is there any given reason? Sorry, was this in 1941, was it? Or
no, this was 1940, mate.
Right.
And the end of 1940. And I've seen people saying, oh, well, Churchill did it because he thought that with the Greeks they could stand, because the Greeks had beaten the Italians, of course, the year before. But, like, his own military intelligence was telling Winston Churchill 20 German divisions were going to invade that place. An extra 20 German divisions. How were 2.5 British Commonwealth divisions going to stand up to that? Now, as it happened, only 15 German divisions invaded, but still, you can't beat 15 divisions with 2.5. Doesn't matter how good you are, you know? And on top of that, there was almost no British air support, because there was almost no British air support in the whole of not only the Aegean and Greece, but in the whole of the Middle East, there was almost none.
Am I right in thinking that the Germans had to then re-invade that area the next year as well?
No.
Didn't they? Because didn't they?
People have argued, Horus, that it delayed the German invasion of Russia by a month. I don't think it did, actually, because of I can't remember what it's called, but the wet period that Russia gets in the spring.
Rasputitsa.
The Rasputitsa, thank you very much, Adam.
Do you speak Russian?
No.
Just
that's Mitch's field.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have a guy called Mitch on our Discord who actually does speak Russian very well. But yeah.
It's not the same Mitch who's got a channel of his own, is it?
I don't think he has, but he should have. But he's a good bloke who's often on the stream. But
there's a guy called Mitch who's got a channel I sometimes watch. But so sorry. Like, I've just heard it said before that one of the reasons why the German attack. Oh, it was 41, wasn't it? Yeah, the German attack on the Soviets was in June 41. Ideally, Hitler wanted to do it.
It was July.
July, right. And ideally, Hitler wanted to do it in April or May or even earlier, but he was apparently clearing up a mess that the Italians had caused in the Balkans or Greece. I've heard that vaguely said. I should know.
Yeah, I think it's mostly bullshit. In all honesty, mate.
It was a distraction for some of the German force. I mean, it's by no means their invasion force of the Soviet Union was pretty damn big.
Yeah,
I mean,
15 divisions is not that much compared to Barbarossa, for God's sake.
Yeah. So yeah.
But the major point from this stream's point of view is, how did Winston Churchill think 2.5, like one Australian, one New Zealand, and a British Armoured Brigade were going to beat 15 German divisions? Like, what were they going to do? Were they going to use, like, I don't know, some sort of magic or what? It's like,
what was the fate of those 2.5 divisions?
Well, they had to retreat, and the Royal Navy had to pick them up off the coast, which they did. And of course, the Royal Navy lost warships doing that. And then they were shifted to Crete, the big Greek island. And the same thing happened again there. The Germans invaded it. They used their airborne division. And the German airborne division lost so many men that Hitler never used them again. Because, you know, it was mostly defended by New Zealand, Australian, and British troops, and the German airborne troopers lost so many soldiers that Hitler would never again allow a large-scale German airborne assault. But we still lost that, and again, the Royal Navy, as they had done off Norway, as they had done off France, as they had done off Greece. Again, at Crete, the Royal Navy had to go there and evacuate the British and Commonwealth soldiers, and lost a load of warships doing so, none of which were available, of course, to fight the Japanese the next year. So, you know.
And did Churchill ever speak about why he was making these sort of futile manoeuvres? I mean, was it?
No,
I mean,
not really.
In times since the war, I often hear people making excuses for Churchill's bad decisions. Like, quite often, just one canard is just that, well, he had to do something. He had to show that he was fighting the war rather than just letting time pass, sort of thing. And I just thought, well, yeah, but at the cost of loads and loads of British lives. I mean, you don't just do those things lightly. If you're a normal leader, anyway. I mean,
look, he's in Malaya and Singapore. To bring us up to what's going to close this stream. Churchill would send nothing to Malaya, basically. Wouldn't allow any tanks. There were no tanks in Malaya. There were no modern British RAF aircraft in Malaya. And Churchill would not allow them, because Churchill insisted there was no chance whatsoever that Japan was going to fight. Even though what Roosevelt was doing to Japan was going to force, i.e. cutting off their oil supplies, was going to force Japan to fight no matter what.
And if they were going to fight, they were going to go south. They couldn't just ignore Singapore and Malaya and that, could they?
No, absolutely they couldn't. But also they wanted the oil resources in the Dutch East Indies. And if you want the oil resources in the Dutch East Indies, obviously, you have to take British Malaya and Singapore. You just have to.
And they were rich in oil as well, weren't they? Malaya was rich in oil, and obviously.
Well, not particularly, but the Dutch East Indies really were. Yeah,
Malaysia is now, at least.
Well, Malaya in those days was more about rubber, which the Japanese also wanted. But the point was, it was always going to happen, and Churchill would allow nothing to be sent there whatsoever. And when he eventually did decide, okay, we're going to send a Royal Navy reinforcement there, he decided to send HMS Prince of Wales, which was a modern battleship, and HMS Renown, which was a very old battle cruiser, and originally a aircraft carrier. Sadly, the aircraft carrier ran aground and had to go off for repairs. And the Admiralty, who didn't want to send those ships there in the first place, they wanted to send them to Ceylon, Sri Lanka as it is now, where they would be a threat to the Japanese flank. The Admiralty then turned around and said, look, Prime Minister, the aircraft carrier can't go now. Sending these ships here now is like suicidal. And Churchill still insisted, no, they've got to go to Singapore.
So am I right in saying that... sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, look, that he insisted they go to Singapore. And of course, when the British Admiral took those 2 ships out with the 6 old destroyers, which was all he had for escort, to go and try and attack Japanese forces invading Malaya, eventually Japanese torpedo bombers found him and sank both his capital ships.
So had naval tactics evolved by this point to where an aircraft carrier, if you had them anyway, would be the centerpiece of a fleet? Or
no. But an aircraft carrier, even with like 30 fires on it, would have made the Japanese job very difficult, because like torpedo bombers had to in those days fly low, straight and level, and my guess is had they had a carrier, they might have got away with it that time, but without one, they had no chance.
Yeah, I think I've read that it was in some of the American battles, naval battles with the Japanese. Was it Guadalcanal or Midway or something, where it was sort of like became clear that the winning tactic, at least at that time in history, navally, was to have an aircraft carrier centric force. And I mean, I don't really know much about military tactics myself, but yeah, I mean, I suppose that's maybe what I'm saying there is not particularly relevant to the Singapore situation, but it's just something I picked up from reading a little bit about. I think it was Guadalcanal or maybe Midway. That was 42, wasn't it? Or 42 or 43, I think.
43 was Guadalcanal, but yeah. It doesn't really make any difference. The point is, Churchill sent an inadequate force that became more inadequate once the carrier ran aground and still insisted it went there. And there were no tanks in the whole of Malaya. And Japanese tanks in World War II were shit. Even in 1945, they were shit. Like, they made Italian tanks, which were also shit, look good.
So had Britain had just a small amount there, it would have made a big difference.
Yeah, just even a certain number of tanks would have, but Churchill would not allow anything to go there. Churchill sent every single spare British tank and every single modern British fire to that scumbag Stalin via Arctic convoys, which cost many brave British sailors, both Royal Navy and Merchant Navy, their lives, because they were attacked by U-boats and surface ships and also aircraft. Churchill sent every single spare British tank and every single spare British modern aircraft to Stalin, and many of them just molded on the docks at Archangel because the Russians didn't like them.
Right.
And he sent nothing whatsoever, nothing to Malaya and Singapore, not one aircraft or one tank, because he was a wank.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that this guy was all about, the empire and stuff is just nonsense. I mean, it's just, even if you, it's just the fact. I mean, sending forces to the Soviets is just it's unforgivable. I mean, it's I mean, obviously, and the Americans did that on an even bigger scale as well, right? With their Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease was to Britain and to the Soviets. But yeah, it's a horrible thing to think that we were supplying the Soviets at great expense to ourselves and
with not stuff even. They didn't even use half the stuff we send them.
I mean, they would have to have a whole supply chain and logistical chain in order to be able to use these things themselves, wouldn't they? I understand that, like, one of the things that was really valuable to them that America supplied was just lorries,
Yep.
Which is a much more transferable thing. Yeah, you still got the problem of replacing parts and stuff, but if you supply enough of them, tens and tens of thousands of them, then maybe it doesn't matter, and that's exactly what America
but between 1942 and 1944, the Russians became more mobile than the Germans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is a thing that I've heard some historians say, that the idea of blitzkrieg is a really misleading idea. It's something that the Germans happened to practice in France and in Barbarossa because it suited the situation. But the Soviet advance from sort of Stalingrad onwards was just as well characterized by the word blitzkrieg, except obviously it's a German word.
But the Germans never really talked about blitzkrieg.
It's not in any of the. Yeah, it's not in Mein Kampf. It's not in any of the military journals. It's just
the Germans spoke about like mission-orientated warfare. So you would say to your dude, like if you were a general, you would say to your colonels in commander regiments, "This is what we've got to do. You go and make plans to do it." Right. And they would then use mobile warfare. There is a German word for that, and I'm not sure what it is. Something Bedenkskrieg or something like that. But that's what Germans actually used, not blitzkrieg.
Yeah, right. Speaking of German generalship, I mean, you mentioned Richard O'Connor as a fine general of Britain. Is there any Germans who you think were like really admirable?
Oh, there were good guys. I mean, like I think obviously Rommel was a good commander. I think maybe a little bit. George is saying it's the Greatenskrieg, which I think he's probably right. Yeah, I think that's what that's what the Germans used for maneuver warfare. But that went back to 1870 and like the war against France, or even 1868 with the war against Austro-Hungary.
Oh right, okay, right, yeah.
But like I said, I think Rommel was a good commander, and he was also a pretty good bloke. Like he wouldn't enforce things like the Hitler commando order, which meant that all British commandos were supposed to be murdered. Like he wouldn't do that. He did nothing against Jewish people in the areas that Germany commanded in North Africa. So I reckon Rommel was a good bloke. Manstein was obviously a pretty good German commander, although his autobiography is not totally honest, but whatever.
Because was Heinz Guderian a great general, do you think?
Well, Guderian learned a lot from the Brits. Because, don't forget, the Brits invented tanks in World War One. The Brits invented tanks, and I
was really proud of that when I was a kid. When I heard that, I was like, yes.
Yeah, me too. But the Brits invented tanks, and Guderian learned a good deal from that. And Guderian did sometimes try and stand up to Hitler, which generally got him sacked. But that's what happens when you have that sort of a leader. But then, the excellent British generals like Wavell and Auchinleck both got sacked by Churchill because he didn't like them. But they were both excellent generals. So, it goes both ways.
So there's one thing I was going to ask about. I guess I assume we're coming sort of towards the end of this stream, maybe the series. But like, what about the Dieppe raid? Is that something attributable to Churchill as well?
Well, as far as I understand it, and it is just as far as I understand it, and I've not looked into it deeply, Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was an actual cuck, because his missus was screwing Nehru in India.
Seriously? What?
Yeah, seriously.
What?
Lord Louis Mountbatten's wife.
The Viceroy of India?
Yeah, his wife was screwing Nehru.
What the fuck?
He was an actual cuck. And he knew about it, apparently. I mean, like, I don't know. I don't look into these things much, but apparently that's true.
A lefty, apart from anything else, a lefty, Nehru. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, and like the guy who agreed to be the Labour Party's patsy to like give up India. Now the IRA blew him up on an Irish lake, and I didn't like that very much. But then I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland fighting against the IRA.
That's not on.
Yeah, I didn't like that very much.
They murdered Norris. They Ross McWhirter as well.
Yeah, they did.
And Airy Neve. Airy Neve was a brave man, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. And they murdered many, many, many people. Like, I remember I was in Belfast in, like, I don't know, 83? And, like, they'd blown up this shopping centre, and I found this chick's pretty ankle-strap stiletto with her foot still in it. Which almost made me heave at the time, but, you know. I've seen much worse things since then, but you know.
Ataman, have you ever held severed body parts? I haven't.
No, it's not part of the sort of things I do on the weekend. So
we missed out on that.
Mm.
Sorry, Duke.
You should join the British Army, guys. You're missing out on these.
Might be a bit.
great.
I'd have to go in at officer level now. I think I'm a bit old.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So, look, I'm not a big fan of Lord Louis Mountbatten, although
but I've heard dodgy rumours about him as well.
Yeah. Well, no.
Is that all tosh, is it?
Yeah, like I said, he was a cuck.
Yeah, I've heard rumours of wrongness on his part as well.
Well, look, he may have had affairs with other women. I got no idea,
worse rumours than that.
All right,
but since they are just rumours to me, I'm not going to go further.
Well, then I don't think they're probably true. Like, I've heard he had affairs with other women, which, blokes do.
I've heard he had affairs with other ages.
Well, so long as they were over 18, I don't care.
I don't think that's what's being implied.
No, but anyway, I shouldn't go because it is just rumours that I've heard. So.
All right. Anyway, but the point is, his actual wife was having an affair with Nero, which I think is like pretty fucking disgusting.
That's cuckoldry squared. That's horrible.
Yeah, he was absolutely a cuck, and he agreed to be Attlee's patsy to make India independent and watch while Indians and Pakistanis killed each other by hundreds of thousands as independence was given to them. But there we go. I'm not going to get into that. That would make me too much of an imperialist. Yeah, that would make me too much of an imperialist and white nationalist and all that sort of shit. So I'm not going to go into any of that.
What would make you? What would be? Why would you be? Oh no, you don't have to explain. I was just wondering.
I'd be a white nationalist because I allowed all these Indians and Pakistanis to murder each other.
Oh right, okay. And the crudest. Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah. So sorry, this was related to the Dieppe raid, was it?
Well, yeah. The reason was because Louis Mountbatten at that stage was in charge of combined operations, and the Dieppe raid came under his purview. And every rumor I've ever heard was that it leaked from him, and the Germans learned of it from him.
Right.
That's why we're talking about Louis Mountbatten.
And within a day, I just read on Wikipedia, within a day, more than half of the men were dead, wounded, or captured. 6,000 men sent. The best part of 4,000 were already taken out.
They sent a Canadian division and a British commando brigade, and most of them were killed or captured.
And this was, I mean, like I've seen sort of documentaries about it and stuff, and people say it's not really clear exactly what aim it served, but I mean, it was to test how vicious a response there'd be to an amphibious attack, to see how well prepared things were. Obviously, it failed as a test, I assume, because obviously it was supposed to be testing a surprise attack, right? And it wasn't a surprise.
Well, who doesn't want to go and do a test? Where if the test doesn't go well, you die. Yeah. Who doesn't want to go and do that? And like I said, they sent a Canadian division and the British Commando Brigade. The British Commando Brigade got away with it relatively okay, but that was possibly because they were commandos and had done a lot of raids before. So they had some idea about getting the shit out of it if things were going bad. Whereas the Canadians were just like, yeah, boys, we're going to attack. Because they weren't told anything. They were just told, yeah, we're attacking France.
Oh God, I shouldn't laugh, but I mean...
No, you shouldn't, because those men were very brave. But they were just told, yeah, we're attacking France. And like, they gave them Churchill tanks and hadn't even worked out that the Churchill tanks couldn't get over the seawall that like faced them. So they'd go up these, the beach there was like an average British beach on the south coast, and it was pebbles. And the Churchill tanks couldn't even cross the seawall to get in there. And the German anti-tank guns just like knocked them out of will. And the guys were then stuck there on these pebble beaches with not a scrap of cover under German mortar and machine gun fire. And they didn't stand an earthly. Very brave men, but they didn't stand an earthly.
Just imagine the scene, like the despondency you must feel realising what your situation, once you realise how bad things are.
Well, the only relief of it was that Royal Navy small ships came in time and time again to really close range to try and take these dudes off. That was the only relief. Because the Royal Navy is like always brave and never lets guys down. And those guys in plywood, sometimes in plywood ships, came like 50 yards off the shore to try and lift the Canadians off. But that's the Royal Navy, and they've always been that way, and I guess they always will be.
I assume they took some serious losses in doing that as well.
Oh yeah, of course they did. They lost quite a lot of ships, and the RAF was trying to do fire patrols over the place, but the Germans had the FW-190 at that stage, which was a better aircraft than the current model of Spitfire. There was a later Spitfire which was better than an FW-190, but at the time of the Dieppe raid, the Germans had the advantage in fires.
God. So have we come to the end of the period that you wanted to cover, or is there any more sort of?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like what I wanted to try and point out to people on this particular stream, Morris, was that 1939, 1940, 1941, and most of 1942 was an absolute disaster for Britain. And Churchill led all of it, and a lot of it was due to his decisions to send troops here, there, and everywhere, or not send troops to places where we needed them. That was my main point. I don't. What you and Ataman think, you guys tell me.
Well, I could add a couple of things to that. That obviously, even after we've sort of come up to 42, but in 40? It was in 43 that there was this. Well, it was ultimately successful, but very costly invasion of Italy. Right. This is obviously after the conclusion of the North African campaign, and Britain and America, maybe France too, Free French, maybe Poles. I'm not sure, but Britain and America invaded Sicily. That went very well. And then when they invaded mainland Italy, that went painfully. But it did. It was successful. It obviously took Italy out of the war. But apparently Churchill pre-sold that as, going after the soft underbelly of Europe. And it's like, what's soft about fighting through the mountains of Italy against, not just the Italians, but the...
Most of the British and American soldiers and South African soldiers who fought there would not have agreed with that. But,
yeah. Well,
it's an absolute... I mean, that country can be turned into an absolute bloodbath pretty easily. I mean, you've only got to think about, at Berchtesgaden, Hitler's Eagle's Nest was built by sort of Italian mountain engineers. That they were very much adapted for that terrain in a way that we did all right, but we just weren't.
I wonder if that
the British Army always did all right, and it was never cowardly, but it was always in World War II put into positions where winning was difficult,
especially by Churchill, right?
Always by Churchill. Yeah,
there's quite a moving song. I think it's from The Wall. I think it's from the movie The Wall, the Pink Floyd film, where Roger Waters sings about. It's called "When the Tigers Broke Free." I don't know if you know that song.
Yeah, it's from the Battle of Anzio when his dad was killed, I think.
And he says, the Anzio bridgehead was held for the price of a few hundred ordinary lives.
Absolutely right.
And I think I think his father was one of them. Never came home, I guess.
Yeah, his father was a platoon officer in that, and he was killed by these German Tigers. Absolutely correct.
Tiger tanks.
Yeah, Tiger tanks, which were like huge, great things with very heavy armor and an 88mm gun, which outclassed anything the Allies had. Yeah,
right,
for sure.
And the other thing I'd cite about Churchill's bad leadership of the war, again, I'm not like well informed on it, but I know about this one, was that in Yugoslavia, as I mentioned earlier, he took this. Apparently, it wasn't only on the basis of this report from the communist spy, traitor Soviet spy, I think it was Jack Klugman, but for other reasons maybe as well. I'm not sure, but there was, among the mainly Serbian, also Croat, Yugoslav partisans who were trying to free Yugoslavia or the Balkans from German control. He eventually, after some months, I think, took the side of the communists. There was the communist forces were led by Josip Tito, who became then the leader of Yugoslavia until he died in the 80s. And like Tito, I mean, among communists, like look at sort of if there's like a league table of communists through history, he seems like one of the least bad, but he was still a goddamn commie, and still like much less preferable than I presume anyway, than the monarchist forces, who would have been sort of mainly Serb. I can't remember what the name of their leader was. It was he's got some quite distinctive name. Something like Mihailovic or something. I don't know. But they
were Chechens, weren't they?
Chechiks was their name, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
I think that might be the Serbian word for monarchists or patriots or something like that. But they were for restoring basically a Serb-led Yugoslav monarchy. I think that's right. So I mean, not ideal. I mean, Yugoslavia was an artificial country. Serb domination of the Balkans has caused all sorts of friction, and there's obviously been wrongs committed against the Serbs as well, and all sorts. So I mean, God knows whether a monarchist Yugoslavia or monarchist Greater Serbia after the war would have been a good state. But I'm sure it would have been better than that region going commie. And certainly, if Yugoslavia hadn't gone commie, then Albania wouldn't have, and Greece wouldn't have been under threat, probably. Because obviously Greece...
Horus, could I ask you a question? What's your position on the war in Ukraine?
In Ukraine? I pretty much want Russia to win. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
great.
me too.
But I really despise NATO. I absolutely
but
hate NATO.
Isn't it amazing that Ukraine has actual, like, Nazi dudes?
Yeah. This was a big factor over the last decade as well. I mean, I used to read the columns of Justin Raimondo at antiwar.com, and he was talking about this at the time of the Maidan coup in 2014, that there was, apart from the Azov battalion, who are kind of famous now, there was also this Stepan Bandera.
Infamous. But, yeah.
Right, yeah. There was this myth that was revived around Stepan Bandera, who was a Ukrainian who joined up with the Germans as they advanced in 41.
Yeah, he did. But he didn't only kill Jewish people. He killed like thousands and thousands of Polish people as well.
Right. Okay. This is another thing that's never talked about, the Polish-Ukrainian friction and stuff. Yeah. So, and there was also Right Sector, which is a newer organization in Ukraine, and they, I think, were responsible for killing a load of, I'm not sure, ethnic Russians, I think, in a building. Like they set alight a building with
Yeah, they did. In Odessa, they herded, I don't know, 50 odd Russian guys into this building, and they say alight. Pretty much like the same thing we hear all the time about the SS and the NKVD in World War II.
Right. So yeah. So like, you know, quote Nazism unquote in Ukraine is also often just anti-Russianism, and obviously the history of Nazism in Ukraine is bound up with their attempt to free themselves from domination by the Soviet Union, which makes me sympathetic to that extent, but not to the extent that they despise.
But Russia ain't the Soviet Union.
I'd agree with you there 1,000 times, and I'm so sick of all these things of saying, "Oh, this is all just a continuation of Russian history." It's like, no, wait, there was a massive interruption in Russian history from 1917 to 1990. You know, like that's not. You know, like Russia obviously existed through that, but it's not.
Yeah, I think if Jonathan Bowden was around today, I'm pretty sure he'd be pro-Russian.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that much about Putin's government or regime either way. I mean, it certainly doesn't seem great.
All right, but hang on, Horace, look at this. They've done this partial mobilization, which is going to give them an extra 300,000 troops. But they've also had an extra 70,000 volunteers.
Right.
Now, and I also know, because I follow these things, that when the British Army is at war, like they were in Afghanistan, for example, for many years, they get more recruits. So that 70,000 for the Russians, I think that's probably true.
And also, there's been a lot of, I mean, apparently the British Foreign Office and the BBC are some of the worst for this, but there's been this myth cultivated ever since March, pretty much, that Russia is constantly on the brink of not just losing, but the whole government collapsing. Putin dying of stress and stuff. Putin being overthrown. Putin going mad. All this.
By spring at the latest, Ukraine is going to be a very long way up shit creek with no paddle.
Yeah, I mean, I think Russia are definitely, almost definitely going to win this. Like, there's always talk of like the Russian front.
Almost. Russia's going to win.
Yeah,
the West is almost. The West, well, yeah, okay. In that case, we're all going to.
It's the only way they can lose, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, you got senile Biden and his controllers, and dimwit Trust and her controllers.
And she's fucking mad. She's mad.
Yeah,
she's fucking dangerous.
Truss and Biden both. I totally agree.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is like those guys could cause World War III, in which case everyone's going to die.
Everyone's going to lose.
Yeah, everyone will lose. But if that doesn't happen, then by the spring, Russia's going to win this easily.
Yeah, maybe even by the end of the year. I mean,
like I say the spring at latest, because they can't do much for the next 2-3 weeks because there's the rainy season in Ukraine when like everything becomes a bog,
mud.
But yeah, mud, absolutely, Alman. But once that stops, and the ground freezes, I reckon the Russians are going to kill these bastards. I think
like what the Western media have, like, in their sort of foaming craziness ever since the war started, what they've hidden as well is the fact that Russia, I think within the first couple, I mean, their plan A was that they were going to try and win in a few days. Obviously, they didn't expect that, but they tried it. And then their plan B was completely different. I think their plan B is they're perfectly happy to fight this over a long time, because they knew that the most likely response would be these sanctions, and they knew that those sanctions would be most harmful to the countries leveling them, to the people of the countries leveling them, which is not a problem for Russia. I mean, obviously Russia's economy is suffering from all this, but what they've done is
but not much, Horace. I mean, and don't you think?
I think they've got bad inflation problems, like even worse than us.
No, not as bad as us at all. Nowhere near as.
I reckon they already had inflation before the war. Worse than us.
But nowhere near as bad as we have in the West. Right. Honestly.
Okay. Yeah.
But I tell you what, don't you think, Horus and Ataman, that our grannies are well worth the sacrifice to save the most corrupt nation in the world, i.e., Ukraine?
Let's
kill our grannies from cold this winter. Let them all die of hypothermia to save Ukraine, which is according to the United Nations, the most corrupt nation in the world.
In the whole world. Fuck.
Yeah.
I knew it was one of the worst. Ataman, sorry, go on. Maybe you're going.
No, I'm just thinking we're straying very off topic, but
No, I'm just taking the piss, mate. Don't worry.
Well, I would just say I think that Russia has realised, as from sort of March onwards, that they could actually gain more than they realised before the war. They didn't realise how poorly the West would react, and they've realised now that they are actually realigning geopolitics. Like India has pretty much gone, and Saudi Arabia. And I mean, Turkey's always a sort of perfidious friend to whoever they're friends with. But Iran and China were already friends with Russia. They've drawn closer. Places like Kazakhstan and all that have drawn closer. Now, India, they've gained pretty much at the loss of America. I mean, it's not going to be as simple as that. But India is now close friends with Russia. Saudi like openly spitting in America's face several times. Whoever saw that coming? So like this has actually gained Russia more than I think Putin ever bargained.
US invasion of Saudi Arabia when, boys?
Right, well, yeah, or some sort of coup or something. Yeah, I mean that's what the Duran have been saying. They've been saying like, watch out, MBS, watch out.
I can't watch the Duran because the English, in inverted commas, Greek guy, like really gets on my tits. The other bloke I quite like, the bloke who lives in Cyprus, is nice. I don't like it.
Makuris is too quick to condemn Britain.
Yeah, he detests Britain. He hates the place. But he's also a defrock lawyer, as far as I understand. Okay. And he's also a lefty. Whereas
he is. It really comes through with him. Like, I mean, the other guy I think says a few lefty things as well. But I like.
No. The Greek guy who lives in Cyprus, who does these videos when he's wandering around Cyprus, he's a right-wing chap.
Okay,
and they've even admitted that's their difference.
Yeah,
I don't mind it.
Because one thing I really hate about Putin, and I can see perhaps strategically why he's doing this, but he stirs up all this anti-colonial stuff and all this, decolonial rhetoric.
Yeah, but
points the finger at us. And Makuris fucking agrees with it all.
Yeah, the English so-called Greek guy does. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like.
But it's bullshit. I can't watch it. So I don't watch the Duran much, but I do watch the dude in Cyprus when he's wandering around.
I just like the fact that they give me a good précis of the news better than anywhere else I can get. I actually, I just keep up with events by watching them, but I sort of filter out their lefty stuff.
Do you watch Lancaster's channel?
No, I don't think I've heard of that.
What's his name? Ataman, you'll know.
I have no idea.
Oh, did you say Lancasters?
Yeah, hang on. I've got to look on my Discord now. Sorry.
Are we done discussing the Second World War now?
No, we're gonna finish. We're gonna finish on that. But
yeah, all I was saying about Yugoslavia was that
Patrick Lancaster. Do go and check out Patrick Lancaster on YouTube. He's an ex-American Navy dude who is married to a Russian lady and reports on Donbass and the war.
Did you appear on his channel at some point?
No, mate. Fuck me. I'd love to. But yeah, no, I'm nowhere near as famous as Patrick Lancaster. And he's a frontline war reporter, for God's sake. Like, you can see bombs and rockets going off on his videos.
Cool, because British journalists don't seem to do that anymore, except when they're pretending to lie in the fucking trenches that ain't trenches.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like Patrick Lancaster. He often looks a bit nervous, but he's actually an ex-United States Navy dude, and he's married to this Russian girl from the Donbass, which is why I think he's been reporting on Donbass since 2014, like for years. And his Russian is still shit, Mitch would say, I think. But, because
I was talking to
speaks good Russian.
This is one reason why the public has been easy to recruit behind Zelensky and so on, is because I was talking to family the other day who they had not heard of the fact that the Donbass had been a conflict zone for the last 8 years. They'd heard no mention of that. These are people who watch the BBC every day. They read The Independent or whatever. We have some good reporters and stuff, but this was not mentioned.
The Ukrainians bombard nursery schools and hospitals and old folks' homes every single day.
And I think egged on to do so probably by NATO as well, or by MI6 or by CIA or whoever, like, because it helps provoke the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely right. And like, you know what? I have no, like, you know, Putin ain't paying me. But honestly, I would like Russia to win, and I'd like them to win quickly.
Talking of people being paid by Putin, I noticed in the chat, Lady of Shalott and someone above said, Sunny Jim here says Makuris is debarred. Yeah, he forged a letter as evidence, and Lady of Shalott said, yeah, he was debarred some years ago.
Yeah, he was.
And I suspect Makuris gets a bit of money from Russia.
Yeah, he might, but I don't like him at all because, like, he constantly nags about Britain and yet lives here. Yeah. Why doesn't he fuck off back to Greece? I mean,
that question goes to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, true, but yeah. Anyway, we like you said, we've got a long way from World War II. Let's finish. Did Winston Churchill win World War II, guys?
Go ahead, Ataman.
Yes.
For who? For who, man?
For America.
and the Soviets.
Yeah. I mean, his whole thing on the Soviets is a bit weird because he starts off pro-Soviets and then he kind of flips, and then he flips back again, like right at the end of the war.
Yeah, when it's far too late to make.
Yeah, and of course, some of that was him always reading the room, like. Is it the Masters of Fate speech that he gives in America, where he starts off being very pro-Soviet Union and then flips because of the audience? But either way, yeah. I mean, he was good at reading the room. But even if you sort of go between the lines, he does flip like twice on his starts on that over the course of the war. I think his meetings with Stalin actually put him off the Soviets quite a lot at like Yalta and places like that. And Sevastopol, and
kind of shows good taste at least, I suppose. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, by the time Churchill flips in 45, Britain is so weak relative to the USA and the USSR that there's nothing he can do. He's way too late.
I think. Ataman put it pretty nicely. Like he did win the war for America.
And the Soviet Union.
Yeah, although obviously, I mean, I've talked to my friend, History Bro. You've done a stream with him once, didn't you?
I do know History Bro. Yeah,
he's a good friend of mine.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. He's now seen on the Lotus Eaters. For anyone who doesn't know, you can see him there. And he's still got his own channel as well. But I was talking to him about this.
So he's drifted left then over the time, is he?
Lotus Eaters have drifted right a little bit as well. I think he's
that's true. That's true.
He's helped influence him in the right direction.
That is true. I have watched Sargon on AA streams. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, they've come some way. They still have some sympathy for the Tory party though, so they're still badly ill in that sense. But I think. As regards the Soviet Union, Churchill obviously did plenty to help them, a great deal, even before the war, let alone during it. Obviously changed his stance by the time he made that Iron Curtain speech in 46, was it, or 47? But the Soviets obviously took terrible damage. The war, I think their plan until Barbarossa began, which took them somewhat by surprise. I mean, they expected war at some point, but I think they thought that they would be able to start it. And I think that the reason their losses were so great during the first few months because they were in attack position. I think they started the war with the hope of basically taking over the whole of Europe, and they ended the war incapable of that, and up against an America that had already used nuclear weapons and which would have 4 more years in which America could use them. By the time of 1949, when the Soviets started demonstrating their bombs, I think there was no question that America was massively more powerful even than them, let alone the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The Soviets, I think, at their height, and I'm talking during the war and during the Cold War, I think this happened a couple of times. Their GDP, not just their budget, their GDP, 70% of it at their worst point was being spent on defense. 70% of their total output. It's almost unbelievable. America never got as high as 10%, I don't think. No higher than 12% anyway. In the whole of their history, they've never spent anywhere near as much. So America had so much more that they could draw upon. So I would say the Soviets could not really be called winners of the Second World War, other than the fact that they survived a war that they probably would have lost. Well, they might well have lost if it had just been them versus Germany. But yeah, Churchill delivered the power of Britain to America, and literally shipping Britain's gold over the Atlantic. What a symbolic moment. And for that, I condemn him as one of the worst people Britain's ever produced. Well, Britain and America together. And an absolute calamity on almost every front for our country. And his losses and his, I don't know if betrayal is the right word, but his terrible leadership is still hurting us right now. It's alive, like history, like the war. We're still losing the war in loads of ways, psychologically, morally, in money terms. It's just a disaster that keeps unfolding, and that's embodied by, presumably like the worst prime ministers we've ever had: Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and Liz Truss. Just who all lionise him, especially Boris Johnson. Yeah, so yeah, it's like it's a calamity that keeps getting worse and worse. We haven't even reached the nadir, and he was more than anyone else the cause of it, I think. So I can't condemn him in strong enough terms. But anyway, back to you.
Adam, what do you think on this stuff? Man?
Well, yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with that.
Yeah, me too.
I think there's probably a few that are quite a bit worse, but they didn't have the opportunity to roll it out in such disastrous ways.
That's true.
But yeah, basically.
I mean, I just think that, like, if Winston Churchill had been a genuinely evil man, and I don't think he was, by the way, but if he'd been a genuinely evil man, an enemy of Britain and the British people, if you look at his political career, certainly from 1908 onwards, it would be very, very difficult to see how he could have done more damage to Britain than he actually did. Like, he crossed the floor from the Conservatives to the Liberal Party in 1908 over imperial tariff reform, which was something that was designed to make the British Empire and the old Commonwealth much more real. He didn't agree with it. He agreed only with free trade, so he left the Conservatives and joined the Liberals. He was central to Britain joining the First World War in 1914, which to me was the original sin of the British Empire, followed very closely by, against all British tradition, building a mass army. Again, Churchill was central to that shit. In the 1920s as Chancellor, he was absolutely central to keeping the 10-year, there will be no war for 10 years rule rolling year after year after year, and not like providing enough defenses for things like the naval base at Singapore. And then in World War II, his absolutely insane nonsense that he did with the British Army, which had to be rescued by the Royal Navy time after time after time after time in the first 3 or 4 years of World War II. Just like followed up on all the other crap that he did. Winston Churchill, as a single human being, did more to destroy the British Empire and Britain as a great power than any other single man in history. And if someone can show me that that's not true, I would love you to do so. And come on, I'll do a stream with you if you can.
I think we've made a good case for that. I know this is a bit out of order as we've just made our concluding statements, but just for a minute, like, do you think he was at fault with what he did with the French Navy? I don't really know much about that myself, but there was that moment.
No, I actually don't. I think that was all right because, like, don't let the Germans get their hands on the French Navy. French Navy was vastly bigger than the German Navy, by the way.
And it would have just fallen into their hands and become their resource.
Yeah, it would still have only been like less than half of the British Navy, but like the French Navy was a lot bigger than the actual German Navy under Hitler, which was tiny.
So to destroy it was actually a wise move.
In my opinion, yeah, it was. And the British admirals in charge did their best to not fight. They tried to get the French to surrender. If the French didn't surrender, well, that's their fucking problem, isn't it?
So on the massive turd that was Churchill's career, that's one little slice of a glacé cherry.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I'd agree with Churchill on. But
a glacé cherry, Mike.
The vast majority of Churchill's career, I certainly don't agree with at all.
Oh man, I've enjoyed this. I think this has been good, and I'd be interested, to discuss more things in future. As I think I said to you just before the stream, I'm going to do this EU series that I've been preparing for the best part of a year. So that's my next thing. But once I've done that, I'll be up for, if you want to discuss more about, other things.
Horus, you're a member of the Discord, and we do these regular splendid isolation streams every Saturday. I think we're on 93 this coming Saturday, UK time. You're always welcome on those, mate, because you're a member of the Discord. And all members of my Discord are welcome on those streams. I'd love to hear what you have to say about modern stuff. Because, we're talking about, history here, which I love, but it is history.
Yeah, I mean, about the time, about what's happening now, I just curse a lot and feel glum, But
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I'm pretty much the same.
I can chuck in a couple of comments. Yeah, I'll
hang on. I've got to put this up on the screen. Jules Roy, who I think he's French. Killing Frenchmen is the only thing 99 Jew likes about Churchill.
Oh, come on, you've got to own that comment. Let's
he's jealous about French greatness and sophistication. Do you know what? Jules Roy, absolutely. Agincourt, Waterloo, bloody, oh God, man. What are the greatest British victories? Let me think. Agincourt, Crécy, Poitiers, Waterloo, and let us never ever forget immortal Trafalgar. So there you go, Jules Roy. So yeah, I'm not going to go backwards on that one, mate. There you go.
I'll actually counter that and say I actually like the French. I just wish they'd give up on this gay Republican experiment.
Yeah, I've known a couple of good French girls, I must say.
I cursed our friendship and alliance with France for the effects that had in an earlier part of the series, but I would always remember that the French were obviously produced Charles Martel and his army, and that was quite an important victory. Was that in Poitiers as well, or it was somewhere near Poitiers, I think, when the Moor was decisively turned back?
Yeah, but Poitiers was the second great English victory of the 100 Years' War under the Black Prince.
Where was Charles Martel's thing? It was the Battle of
Tours.
Much earlier.
Tours, yeah, in the 700s, was it? Or the 600s? Yeah, 700s, I think.
Early, yeah. And sort of also kind of laid the groundwork for the creation of France as a nation as well.
Yeah. And I remember...
I'm not against the French. I mean, I've known a couple of quite cute French girls.
Some of the loveliest women ever, yeah. But when the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened, everyone had the Je suis Charlie thing. I made sure to put one that was Je suis Charles Martel, which I thought was very clever at the time. I've still got it. That'll be my avatar next time if I remember.
Yeah, I know. Look, I like I said, France and England have had a very long rivalry, which invariably ended in England winning, of course. But that's just the way.
And of course, just to quickly add on to the end of that last bit, that the French did also really pull their weight in the Crusades too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they did. Well, except they didn't really though.
There was a huge across all the Crusades. There was a huge amount of it was largely a French and English endeavour. But the
Third Crusade turned it into almost entirely an English deal.
Yeah.
The French king was a coward and went home.
Yeah, and that's why Hilaire Belloc's book on the Crusades is probably one of his best, because it's sort of him writing about his actual ancestral people.
Yeah, true enough. Got no problem with that. But yeah, I think we've probably covered our subject. All right. I'll tell you what I want to finish this on. In 1942, a U.S. cruiser whose name I can't remember the name of this American Navy cruiser went to Cape Town. And it took
was
away...
it the USS Flash Bastard? Sorry.
Well, a U.S. Navy cruiser went to Cape Town in South Africa, and from there they took away the very last of the British gold reserves to America under Winston Churchill. And by 1945, Britain was a totally bankrupt state. There was little more than a British military colony of Churchill's beloved American mother's nation. And I think that's how we should end this stream.
Well said.
I'm actually going to end this stream with a tune. And when this guy talks about Lady Astor was actually born in America, I believe. So there we go.
Well, cheers, guys. I'm going to drop out while the tune's playing. I really enjoyed this, and thanks
No
everyone
worries.
for listening. And I'll be on the Discord, so I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, links to Horus's stuff is in the description, by the way.
Thanks, everyone.
Where the D-Day Dodgers out in Italy, always on the vino, always on the spree. 8 army scroungers and their tanks, we live in Rome among the Yanks. We are the D-Day Dodgers, way out in Italy. We landed at Salerno, a holiday with pay. The Jerry's got their bands out to greet us on the way. Showed us the sights, they gave us tea. We all sang songs, the beer was free. To welcome D-Day Dodgers to sunny Italy. Naples and Casino were taken in our stride. We didn't go to fight there, just went for the ride. Anzio and Sangro were just names. We only went to look for dames. The artful D-Day Dodgers, way out in Italy. Dear Lady Astor, think you know a lot, standing on your platform, talking Tommy Rot. New England sweetheart and a pride, we think your mouth too bloody white. That's from the D-Day Dodgers, way out in Italy. Look around the mountains in the mud and rain. See the scattered crosses, some which have no name. Heartbreak and toil, suffering gone. the boys beneath them linger on. They are the D-Day Dodgers who'll stay in Italy.
Okay, so there you go, boys. That was the D-Day Dodgers, which was started, believe it or not, by a real British MP, Lady Astor, stood up in the House of Commons and said that all the British soldiers fighting in Italy were D-Day Dodgers. Because, of course, they'd all asked to be sent to Italy, and they could all be sent wherever they asked to go. But, and that is the true story. Thank you very much to Horus. Ataman, anything you want to plug, mate?
No, nothing from me.
Right. Well, you will find links to Horus's stuff on the World Wide Web, and also Ataman's excellent channel on what's his name?
It's a series of Bowden clips, yeah.
Yeah.
That I made primarily for TikTok, but I've also just uploaded them on YouTube for people to watch.
Yeah. Ataman's got some Bowden stuff, and there's a link to that in the description. And I will be back in only an hour or two on Red Hawk's channel, where we are going to be talking on Man's Hour on Red Hawk's channel about the military. And I'm going to give you a spoiler. I'm not going to be recommending people to join it these days, sadly. And that actually guts me quite considerably. But anyway, come and see that. Go and check out Red Hawk's channel. I guess I'll be online again in like an hour or so. So there we go. Go on. Thanks, Horus, and thank you very much, Ataman.
Yeah, no worries. Good night, all.